At Christmas dinner, my 5-year-old daughter accidentally spilled juice. My mother-in-law slapped her. I stood up, shaking, but my wife screamed she deserved it. No one defended her. No one said a word. So I picked up my daughter and walked out. By morning, they were begging me to come back. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now let's dive into today's story. The neighborhood outside Spokane looked like something off a greeting card. Snow pressed flat against every rooftop and banked soft along the sidewalks. The streetlights threw a pale glow over the quiet road, and each house on the block was decorated with Christmas lights, warm yellows and deep reds blinking in slow, patient rhythms. Children's footprints tracked across front lawns and disappeared at doorsteps. Wreaths hung on every door. From the outside, it looked like the kind of street where nothing could go wrong. Gavin Hayes did not feel peaceful. He sat at the far end of Dolores Kincaid's dining table, back straight, fork resting and used at the edge of his plate. The house smelled of roasted chicken and something sweet baking in the oven, cinnamon, maybe brown sugar. A fat pillar candle burned at the center of the table, throwing soft light across the white tablecloth. The kind of smell and the kind of light that belonged in a warm memory. But Gavin could not relax into it. He hadn't been able to relax in this house for a long time. Maybe ever. 6 years of Christmas dinners in this house. 6 years of sitting at this table and feeling the particular tightness in his shoulders that he only ever felt here. He had told himself, in the early years, that it was just an adjustment period, that every marriage required learning how to fit into another family, that he was being too sensitive, that things would settle. They had not settled. They had calcified. Lila sat beside him. She was 4 years old, dark-eyed, careful in the way small children become careful when they have learned that the wrong move costs them. She held her plastic juice cup with both hands, the way Gavin had noticed she always did at her grandmother's house, like she was bracing herself. She had been quiet since they arrived. She was always quiet here. At home, in their kitchen, she talked constantly. Questions about clouds, about why dogs were smaller than horses, about what happened to the moon in the daytime. Here, she went still. He watched her fingers tighten around the cup and felt a low, steady unease move through his chest. Brinley sat across the table, his wife of 6 years. She was talking to Dolores about something, a neighbor's renovation, a price on something she had seen at a store, and her voice had that particular lightness she only used in her mother's house. Not warmth exactly, more like performance. She sat differently here too, her posture looser, her laugh quicker, like she became a younger version of herself inside these walls. Gavin had stopped being able to tell whether that version was real or not. Dolores Kincaid sat at the head of the table. She was 61, thin, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that moved fast, cataloging everything, dismissing most of it. She had the posture of a woman who believed the room owed her its attention, and most people in her life had agreed with her long enough that she had never been corrected. She had never liked Gavin. He had always known it, and she had never bothered pretending. In the early years, she had been subtle about it. A cool tone, a passed-over comment, a habit of directing questions at Brinley as though Gavin were not present. As the years went on, she had stopped bothering with subtlety. The dinner went quietly enough for the first 20 minutes. Gavin kept his answers short when Dolores spoke to him, which was not often. He cut Lila's chicken into small pieces without being asked. He refilled her water when it ran low. He kept his eyes moving around the table in a steady, quiet way, not looking for conflict, just watching. He had developed that habit over years of trying to read the room in this house, to see what was coming before it arrived. Then Brinley looked across the table at him, her voice dropping just below the level of conversation. "Mom spent all day cooking," she said. "At least act like you want to be here." Gavin kept his eyes on his plate. He said nothing. He had learned over the years that responding to that kind of comment only extended it. Brinley did not want a conversation. She wanted him to either agree or give her a reason to escalate. He had stopped giving her either. It was a small discipline, saying nothing, but it was the only one that worked. He picked up his fork and ate a bite of chicken. The dinner continued. Dolores was telling a story about someone at her church. Some failing, some embarrassment the person had brought on themselves by being reckless or foolish. Brinley was laughing in a way that meant she thought her mother was brilliant. Gavin listened with the surface of his attention while the rest of it stayed fixed on Lila, who was eating slowly and carefully and not making a sound. Then it happened. Lila's elbow caught the edge of her cup. It tipped, and the juice, cranberry, dark red, spread across the white tablecloth in a wide, fast stain. Lila froze. Gavin was already reaching for napkins. It was a spill. It was a 4-year-old spill at a Christmas dinner table, and it was nothing, and he had his hand out before the cup had even finished rolling. He was going to wipe it up. It was going to be fine. He was already thinking about the words he would use to tell Lila it was all right. He never got the chance. Dolores moved so fast that Gavin almost did not register it. She was up from her chair, and her hand came across in one sharp, flat motion before any other part of her body had fully risen. The sound of it filled the room completely, a hard, flat crack that bounced off the walls and the ceiling and the window glass. Lila's head snapped sideways with the force of it. A beat of absolute silence, not even a breath. And then Lila's face crumpled, and the crying started. Gavin was on his feet. "Are you out of your mind?" His voice came out louder than he intended, scraped raw at the edges. He did not care. Dolores stood with her hand still raised slightly, her expression not horrified, not ashamed, calm. The calm of a person who believed they had done the right thing and would not be persuaded otherwise. She looked at Gavin the way she always looked at him, like he was an inconvenience. "She needs to learn discipline," Dolores said. That tablecloth was a gift. The tablecloth. Gavin stared at her for one stunned second. Then he turned to Brinley. He needed her to look at him. He needed her to say something, anything, that acknowledged what had just happened in front of them. That the woman at the head of the table had just struck their daughter across the face for spilling a drink. Brinley looked at Lila, who was crying steadily now, her small hands pressed flat against her cheek. Then she looked back at Gavin. "She deserved it," Brinley said. The two words dropped into the room and stayed there. Gavin stared at his wife. He had not misheard. He was looking for something in her face, confusion or regret, or some sign that she had heard herself and understood what she had just said. He found nothing. Her face was composed, faintly irritated, the way it got when she thought he was making things unnecessarily complicated. "You just watch that happen," he said. His voice was very quiet now, quieter than it had been when he was shouting, somehow more dangerous for it. "You are overreacting," Brinley replied, her tone shifting to the particular weariness she used when she wanted to make him feel unreasonable. "Stop acting like she is made of glass." She spilled. "There are consequences for carelessness. That is how children learn." Later, Gavin would think about that moment. He would think about all the times before it. The smaller moments he had explained away, the comments he had let pass, the vague, wrong feeling he had carried for 2 years without ever giving it a name. He would think about every time he had told himself it was a difficult family dynamic, that every family had friction, that he needed to be more patient. All of it had been leading here. All of those small retreats had allowed this to keep happening. This was the moment he finally understood what he was dealing with. He did not yell anymore. He did not argue. He walked around the table, crouched beside Lila, and gathered her against his chest. She grabbed his collar with both fists and buried her face in his shoulder. He could feel her shaking against him, her small body hiccuping with the effort of crying. He put one hand on the back of her head. "We are leaving," he said. He was not talking to Lila. He was not talking to anyone in particular. He was stating a fact. He stood up with Lila in his arms and walked toward the front door. He did not look back at the table. He did not stop to collect things. He did not look at Dolores. Behind him, Brinley's voice came flat and certain. "Go ahead. You will come crawling back." He kept walking. He opened the front door and stepped out into the cold. The inside of the car was cold. Gavin started the engine and turned the heat on high. He could see his breath in the air. Lila was buckled into her seat behind him, still sniffling in the uneven way children cry after they have mostly finished. Small hitches of breath, a wet sound, the gradual wind down. He watched her in the rearview mirror while the vents began to push out warm air. Her cheek was still red. Even in the dim light from the street lamp outside, he could see it. He made himself look at it for a moment before he looked away. He kept his hands on the wheel, even though he had not pulled out of the driveway yet. He needed a second, just a second to breathe through it. The image of Dolores's hand moving, the sound of it, the way Lila had gone completely still before the tears came. A child goes still like that when they have learned not to react immediately, when they have learned to wait and see what comes after the hit before they let themselves feel it. He knew that. He knew what that stillness meant. He pressed his back against the seat and let out a long, controlled breath. Then Lila's voice came from the back seat, very small and careful. "Daddy, is Grandma mad at me?" The question hit him somewhere deep. Not because it was surprising. It was exactly the question a 4-year-old would ask, trying to make sense of something she had no framework for. It hit him because she was already doing it. She was already trying to figure out what she had done wrong. She had been hit, and her first instinct was to wonder if she deserved it. That was not the thinking of a child who had only experienced this once. He turned in his seat to face her. "No, baby," he said. He made sure she could see his face when he said it. "Grandma was wrong. What she did was wrong. None of it had anything to do with you." Lila looked at him, uncertain. She had that expression children get when they want to believe something, but are not sure yet if it is safe to. "It was just a spill," he said. "Spills happen. I have spilled things. You have seen me do it. Nobody gets hurt for a spill." She was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then she asked, very carefully, "Are we going home?" "Yes," he said. "We are going home." She held his gaze for a moment longer, then gave a small, slow nod. He turned back to the wheel. He pulled out of the driveway and drove. The road was quiet. Snow moved in slow, lazy spirals through the headlights. He drove without a destination in mind at first, just away from that house, that table, that room where his daughter had been struck and his wife had called it deserved. The heater worked steadily. After a few minutes, Lila's breathing behind him went slower and more regular. He checked the mirror and saw her head tipped sideways, eyelids heavy. He did not sugarcoat what had happened. He did not pretend. He had made that decision before tonight, though he had never had to test it quite like this. The decision that no matter what happened between him and Brinley, Lila would never be confused about what was real. She would never grow up wondering if something wrong was actually normal, would never learn to call her own pain dramatic. He had promised himself that. It was maybe the only promise he had been completely certain about. Tonight was the first time he truly understood what keeping that promise might cost him. He drove until he saw a motel sign off the highway exit. He pulled in. The motel was a basic roadside place. Clean enough, nothing more. Gavin had booked a room with 2 beds and carried Lila inside without waking her. He got her shoes off and pulled the blanket up to her chin and sat on the edge of the other bed in the dark for a while, listening to her breathe. The room smelled of air conditioning and the faint chemical trace of cleaning products. The television was off. The only light came from the gap at the bottom of the curtains, a thin yellow stripe from the parking lot lamp outside. He sat with his jacket still on and stared at the floor and let the events of the evening move through his mind in sequence, the way he sometimes worked through a construction problem. What had happened, in what order, what it meant. His phone buzzed at 9:47 p.m. Brinley. He let it ring twice. Then he answered. "You embarrassed me tonight," she said. No hello. No asking where they were or whether Lila had calmed down or whether the mark on her face had faded. Just that. The accusation, flat and immediate, as though it were the most urgent fact of the evening. Gavin looked at the ceiling. A car passed outside, its headlights sweeping briefly through the gap in the curtains and then disappearing. "Your mother hit our daughter," he said. "And you turned it into a scene," Brinley snapped. "You picked her up and walked out in front of everyone like you were making some kind of point. It was humiliating, Gavin. Mom was embarrassed. I was embarrassed. There was no one else there," he said, keeping his voice even. "It was the 4 of us. Who was embarrassed in front of whom? That is not the point. Then what is the point?" He kept his voice even. He was not going to raise it. Lila was sleeping 6 feet away, and he was not going to raise his voice. "Tell me the point, Brinley." A pause. He could hear her breathing on the other end. He could also hear the particular quality of that pause. Not hesitation, not remorse. She was reorganizing. "You always do this," she said. "Something happens, and you make it into a crisis. Every single time. You have always been this way. Everything is a catastrophe with you." She hit our daughter across the face at the dinner table. It was a slap. Kids get slapped. My mother slapped me when I was young, and I did not fall apart over it. I turned out fine. He did not answer that. There was nothing he could say to it that she would be willing to hear. She had made her position clear. Her mother's behavior was a known and acceptable thing, and Gavin's objection to it was the problem, not the behavior itself. He thought about all the times over the past 2 years when he had sensed that position without being able to name it clearly. The deflections. The way every concern he raised about Lila ended with a comment about him being oversensitive or controlling. The way any friction between Gavin and Dolores was framed as Gavin's fault. He had been slowly, quietly taught that his instincts were the issue. Tonight had clarified that lesson in a way he could not unlearn. "If you come home tonight," Brinley continued, her voice shifting, not warmer, but more deliberate, measured. "You apologize to my mother. You go back there and you tell her you are sorry for making a scene. That is how we move past this." The words were simple, clear. There was no ambiguity in them. She was telling him that there was a version of tonight in which he walked back through that door and said sorry to the woman who had hit his child. She believed that was reasonable. She believed he was capable of it. She believed, in fact, that he would do it. He thought about all the times he had done some version of that. All the quiet retreats, the swallowed objections, the apologies for reactions that were entirely justified. He had told himself it was patience. He had told himself it was the work of keeping a marriage together. He had convinced himself that maintaining peace was a form of love. He understood now what it had actually been. It had been a slow surrender. Each time he retreated, he had taught everyone in that house, including Brinley, including Lila, that his limits had no real edge. "No," he said. He ended the call. He sat in the dark for a long time after that. He did not pace. He did not rehearse arguments or draft plans. He just sat and let the clarity of it move through him. Outside, the snow was still falling in the quiet, unhurried way it falls at night when no one is watching. Lila's breathing was soft and steady from the other bed. He listened to it. Somewhere in the stillness of that room, something settled in him. Not a decision exactly. It did not feel like a choice being made so much as a truth being acknowledged. He was not going back to that house. Not to apologize. Not to smooth things over. Not to give Brinley another chance to tell him that what he had seen with his own eyes was not what he thought it was. He was not going back. He thought about what that meant in practical terms. A lawyer. A place to stay. Lila's daycare routine kept stable, so she did not have to adjust too many things at once. He thought about these things in sequence, methodically, because he was a man who dealt with hard situations by breaking them into the parts he could act on. He could not undo Christmas night. He could not reach back 2 years and make better choices for the people who had failed his daughter. But he could make a plan for what came next, and he could begin it tonight. The snow had been falling when they left Dolores's house. It was still falling now, for hours later, soft and indifferent to everything happening below it. He watched it through the gap in the curtains for a while. Then he got up, turned off the bathroom light that had been casting a thin strip of brightness across the floor, and lay back on the bed in the dark. He did not sleep for a long time, but when he finally did, it was the sleep of a person who has made a decision and is done arguing with themselves about it. Deep and without dreams. The next morning, Gavin was up before Lila. He stood at the small window and watched the parking lot while the coffee maker on the counter dripped through its cycle. The snow had stopped overnight. The sky outside was flat and pale gray, the kind of winter sky that offers nothing. No warmth, no drama, just the dull, steady pressure of a cold day settling in. He had his phone in his hand. He had been looking at it for 10 minutes without using it. He had a number saved, a family law attorney named Darren Pike, whose name had come to him through a friend of a friend 3 weeks ago. He had looked Darren up at the time and saved the number without fully letting himself understand why. He had told himself it was just research, just information to have. He knew now why he had saved it. He pressed call. Darren answered on the second ring. Darren Pike was a family law attorney based in Spokane, direct, plain-spoken, with a reputation for not wasting his client's time or his own. He was in his early 50s and had handled hundreds of cases, which meant he had long ago learned how to listen to someone at the beginning of a crisis without letting their urgency become his own. He let Gavin talk. Gavin told him everything. Dolores, the slap, Lila's face, Brinley's response, the phone call. He kept his voice measured. He had spent 11 years as a building contractor, and in that work you learned to describe problems clearly. Not bigger than they were, not smaller either. Just exactly what they were. When he finished, Darren was quiet for a moment. Then he asked his first question. Is this the first time something like this has happened? Gavin opened his mouth. Then he stopped. He stood at that window, and he thought about the question honestly, without the filters he had been applying for 2 years. The filters that turned red flags into misunderstandings. That reframed his unease as his own insecurity. That told him he was reading too much into things, that he was too protective, that Lila was a healthy child and nothing was wrong. No, he said quietly. It is not. And once he said it, he could not put the thought back. He thought about the way Lila flinched when someone raised their voice. Not a startled flinch, a practiced one. The kind that happened before the raised voice had even fully formed, as if she had learned to read the tension in a room and move her body in anticipation of what it meant. He had noticed it for months and told himself she was just a sensitive child, a child tuned to the moods of the adults around her. He had used the same word Brinley used. He had not examined why. He thought about how she went quiet in the car rides home after visits to Dolores. Not sleepy quiet. She had a different look when she was tired, heavy-eyed and soft. This was different. She would sit against the car door with her arms folded across her middle and look out the window at nothing. Closed down, like something in her had shut a door and locked it. He had always waited for her to open back up, and she always did, eventually. He had never asked himself what was behind that door. He thought about the Thursday evening 4 months back when he had come home to find Lila sitting alone in her room with her toy animals arranged in a perfect line across her bed. She had not been playing with them. She had just been sitting, hands in her lap, eyes on the wall. He had crouched beside her and asked what she was doing, and she had looked at him and said, waiting. He had asked what she was waiting for. She had not answered. He had asked Brinley what had happened. Brinley had said nothing happened. She gets in moods sometimes, and Gavin had accepted it because he had not known what else to do with it. He knew now. All of it lined up, piece by piece, in the cold light of that morning, and he could not look away from what it formed. He thought about a day in September when Lila had stood at the front door in her jacket and refused to take another step toward the car. Brinley was taking her to Dolores's house for the afternoon. Lila had just stopped, her jaw set, her eyes down, her small body positioned like a wall. She had not said why. She had not explained herself. Brinley had told her she was being ridiculous, and eventually she had moved. Gavin had watched from the doorway and told himself she was just having a hard morning. He had gone back inside. She had been trying to tell him something. She did not have the words for it yet. Or perhaps she had already understood, in the way children understand things without being able to articulate them, that the words would not change anything. But she had stood at that door and used the only language she had, and the adults around her had redirected her and moved on. He had been one of those adults. He stood at the motel window and sat with that fact without flinching away from it. Not to punish himself. There was no time for that, and it would not help Lila. But he was not going to soften it either. He had not seen it clearly because seeing it clearly was harder and scarier than not seeing it. That was the truth of it. He was not going to do that anymore. He felt sick. I need to know my options, he told Darren. For custody. Full custody. I need to move quickly. Come in today, Darren said. We will go through everything. After his meeting with Darren, Gavin drove to Lila's daycare. He had called ahead during the morning and asked to speak with her lead teacher before the afternoon pickup. The woman at the front desk, young, with a cheerful efficiency that seemed almost surreal given what Gavin was carrying, showed him to a small conference room off the main hallway. It had a low round table and 4 plastic chairs. A box of tissues sat on the corner of the table. He was not sure if that was always there or if someone had put it there for him. Ms. Renee Calder came in a few minutes later. She was mid-40s, with patient eyes and the particular composure that comes from years in a room full of small children, steady, unhurried, quietly alert to everything around her. She shook his hand and sat across from him. Then she looked at him, and something in her expression shifted. She looked relieved, not just professionally composed, not just politely welcoming, actually relieved. The way a person looks when they have been carrying something heavy for a long time and can finally set it down. "I'm glad you came in," she said. "I did not know how to bring this to you. I have been trying to find the right way for a while now." She opened a folder on the table between them. Inside were printed incident logs, dated entries, brief and clinical in language, the kind of documentation that daycare staff are trained to produce and most parents never see. He picked up the first sheet and read. Bruising noted on Lila's upper arm, 3 months ago. Parent not responsive to inquiry about cause. Behavioral shift logged over subsequent weeks. Increased withdrawal, reluctance to participate in group activities, flinching during transitions. 2 additional bruising entries over the following 6 weeks, both on the arms. A notation about Lila hiding under a table during free playtime and refusing to come out until a staff member sat beside her on the floor and waited with her for 15 minutes. Gavin read each entry twice. His jaw was tight. "The bruising," he said. "Who was doing pickup on those days?" Ms. Calder hesitated. It was a small hesitation, less than a second, but he caught it. "Your mother-in-law was listed as an authorized pickup," she said carefully. "She came in on those days. She's firm with Lila. I have seen her take her by the arm harder than I would expect. I documented what I could. I raised it with your wife once, about 6 weeks ago. I asked if everything was all right at home. What did my wife say?" Ms. Calder looked at him steadily. The relief in her eyes had not gone away. She said Lila was dramatic and that her mother was just firm with her. She said it in a way that made it clear she was not interested in continuing the conversation. She paused. She left quickly. After that, I did not know who else to go to. I kept documenting. I kept hoping something would change. Gavin stared at the folder in front of him. He could feel something moving through his chest. Not grief. Exactly, though grief was part of it. Not just anger, though that was there too. Something harder and colder and more focused. Clarity. The slow, painful clarity of finally seeing the shape of something you have been standing too close to for too long. His daughter had been suffering in small, documented ways. The people closest to her had been building walls around it. Brinley had known. She had known, and she had looked a trained educator in the eye and dismissed her. She had chosen, with full awareness, to close a door on her daughter's pain. "Can I have copies of everything in this folder?" he asked. "I have them ready for you," Miss Calder said. "I was hoping you would ask." He took the folder home and read every page 3 times. Then he called Darren and told him what was in it. Darren had suggested the day before that they try to obtain security footage from the daycare for any days when Dolores had done pickup. It was a straightforward request with a straightforward legal basis, and the daycare administrator agreed without any difficulty. They pulled the footage from 3 separate dates, matching the incident logs. Gavin watched it that evening in Darren's office, sitting in a chair across from a monitor on the conference table. Darren sat beside him and said nothing. The footage was the kind of grainy, overexposed video that outdoor cameras at a daycare produce. Washed out colors, slightly too bright in the center of the frame, dark and soft at the edges. But the action in each clip was completely clear. There was no difficulty making out what was happening. The first clip showed Dolores arriving at the side entrance. Lila came out through the door with a staff member at her side. As soon as the staff member turned back inside, Dolores reached down, grabbed Lila's arm at the shoulder, and pulled her hard in the direction of the parking lot. Not a guiding pull, not even an impatient pull. The kind of grip that leaves marks, applied with the confidence of a person who did not worry about being seen. Gavin watched it without moving. The second clip was worse. Dolores was crouched to Lila's level in the parking lot, close to her face, clearly speaking. Then she stood and grabbed Lila's wrist and pulled her forward. Lila stumbled. Her free hand went out to catch herself on nothing. Dolores did not slow down or look back. The third clip was the one that stayed with him. It had been captured at a different angle, a second camera mounted near the parking lot entrance. Dolores was at the car. Lila had not gotten in fast enough. Maybe she had hesitated. Maybe she had said something. It was not clear from the footage. What was clear was Dolores reaching down and grabbing her by both shoulders and shaking her. It was not a long motion. It was short and sharp and decisive, and Lila's head moved with it. Then Dolores opened the back car door and pushed her in and closed it. And in the far right edge of the frame, barely in shot, positioned against the building wall, just behind the parking lot entrance, was a figure. Brinley. She was watching. She stood with her arms down at her sides and watched her mother grab her 4-year-old daughter by the shoulders and shake her. She did not move. She did not take a step forward. She did not raise a hand or open her mouth. She just stood with her back against the wall and watched. And when Dolores closed the car door, Brinley walked around to the passenger side and got in. Darren let the clip run to the end. The screen went still. The timestamp in the corner read 4:22 p.m. on an ordinary Tuesday in late October. Gavin sat in the silence for a moment. He did not yell. He did not press his hands over his face. He felt something move through him that was not anger, not grief, not shock. It was steadier than any of those things. Absolute. Final. "We are done," he said. Darren looked at him. He had seen a lot of people at the breaking point of marriage. He recognized what he was seeing now. "I mean, with everything," Gavin said. His voice was calm. "The marriage. The house. All of it. I want to file immediately. I want full custody. I want a protective order keeping that woman away from my daughter." "I understand," Darren said. "We will start the paperwork tonight." He went back to the house 3 days later. Darren had advised him that returning to the shared home was his legal right, that he needed to retrieve his belongings and make the situation clear in person before the filing. But that was not really why he went. He went because he had made a decision and he was going to deliver it to Brinley's face. She deserved to hear it in person. Or maybe he needed to say in person. He was not entirely sure which one it was. It was a Thursday afternoon. He had confirmed that Lila was at daycare before he drove there. He knocked on his own front door. That felt strange in a way that was hard to describe. Standing on the step of a house he had lived in for 4 years and knocking like a visitor. But he was not going to walk in as though nothing had changed. Everything had changed. He was going to be clear about that from the first moment. Brinley opened the door. She was in her work clothes, jacket on, like she had just come home. When she saw him, her expression settled into the familiar, tired irritation she used when she thought he was being difficult. "You done punishing us?" she said. He stepped inside without answering. She moved back to let him in, more from habit than welcome. The house looked the same. It smelled the same. The Christmas decorations were still up. He noticed that she had not taken down the ornament Lila had made at daycare, a small painted star with her handprint pressed into the center. It hung in the window near the couch. He looked at it briefly and then looked away. He turned to face Brinley and took out his phone. He pulled up the third clip and held it out toward her without saying anything. She looked at it. He watched her watch it. He had not been sure, when he drove over, what he would see on her face when she saw the footage. He had considered several possibilities: shock, denial, anger at him for having it, or something he could not predict. What he saw was none of those things exactly. He saw her recognize herself on the screen, and her face went quiet in a way that told him she was not experiencing this as a revelation. She was experiencing it as exposure. That is not. She was only, "It looks worse than what it was," she said. Her voice was lower than usual, controlled in a way that required effort. "Don't," Gavin said. The word came out clean and hard. "Don't try to explain it to me. I watched it 11 times. I know what it shows." The front door opened behind them. Dolores walked in. She had a key. She had always had a key, and Gavin had told himself for years that it was just a convenience for family emergencies. She stopped when she saw Gavin. Her expression sharpened immediately into something defensive and cold. "You have some nerve coming back here," she said. Gavin turned to face her. He looked at her for a long moment. He did not say anything right away. He let her feel the silence. Then, "You spent 2 years hurting my daughter, grabbing her, shaking her, hitting her. And the entire time, your daughter was standing right beside you and letting it happen." He held up the phone so Dolores could see the screen. "I have it on video." I have incident reports from her daycare going back 6 months. I have photographs of bruising. I have an attorney who filed papers this morning. And we are done here. Dolores's mouth opened. You are twisting things, she said, her voice rising. You are taking normal, reasonable discipline and making it into something it is not. I raised 3 children. I know how to manage a child who is being careless. No, Gavin said simply. I'm not twisting anything. I am showing people exactly what it is. He turned back to Brinley. She had not moved from where she stood. Her arms were crossed. She was looking somewhere past his shoulder, at the wall, or the window, somewhere that was not him. Every time something happened, you had a choice, he said. You could have said something to your mother. You could have changed the pickup schedule. You could have walked across a parking lot and put yourself between her and Lila. You had every chance over and over again, and every single time you chose not to take it. Brinley said nothing. That is the part one will never understand, he said. Not the anger, not the impatience. That I could have worked with. What I cannot understand is how you watched your own child and decided she was worth less than the peace of keeping your mother comfortable. He put his phone in his pocket. You chose this. Everything that comes next, all of it, is what you chose. He picked up the bag he had packed from the bedroom and walked out the front door. He did not slam it. He closed it quietly, the way you close the door on something that is finished, and walked to his car. Darren filed the paperwork on a Friday. Divorce petition, motion for emergency temporary custody, and a request for a protective order restricting Dolores Kincaid from any unsupervised contact with Lila. He had structured the filing carefully, with the daycare incident reports and a summary of the footage attached as supporting exhibits. The motion for emergency custody was granted within a week. A temporary order put Lila in Gavin's custody pending the full hearing, with no contact between Lila and Dolores. Brinley retained her own attorney within days. Patricia Holt was a sharp, experienced woman in her early 50s with a reputation for effectiveness in high-conflict custody disputes. She was methodical, well-prepared, and not easy to rattle. Darren had briefed Gavin on her. Gavin had listened and said he was not concerned. He had evidence. The weeks that followed were the grinding, exhausting kind of legal battle where very little seems to happen and everything is actually happening simultaneously beneath the surface. Filings were submitted and responded to. Hearings were scheduled, some rescheduled. Gavin organized his materials compulsively. Every document in a binder, chronological and tabbed, copies in a second location. He drove Lila to sessions with Dr. Vera Okonkwo, a child psychologist who specialized in early childhood trauma and had been recommended by Darren. He sat in the waiting room each time, hands folded, not reading, not checking his phone. Just there. Dr. Okonkwo's reports were careful and measured. She did not use dramatic language or make sweeping declarations. She documented behavioral patterns, hypervigilance in contexts associated with loud voices or sudden movement, elevated startle response, avoidance of situations that had previously involved negative adult interaction. She described how Lila talked about her grandmother. She described what Lila drew when given free choice. She described the specific ways in which a child who has experienced repeated, unpredictable physical punishment behaves differently from a child who has not. When Gavin read the reports, he sat very still for a long time each time. Brinley's legal strategy became clear within the first 2 weeks. Patricia Holt filed motions characterizing Gavin as controlling, emotionally volatile, and prone to overreaction. There were declarations from Dolores, from 2 of Brinley's friends who described Gavin as difficult and aggressive, and from a neighbor who had apparently witnessed one of their arguments 2 years prior. Brinley's own deposition described Christmas night as a meltdown, characterized Gavin's history as a pattern of dramatic responses to minor events, and stated, flatly, that Lila was a healthy and well-adjusted child who had never been in any danger. Darren walked Gavin through each filing without visible frustration. He had seen this approach many times. They want the judge to form an impression of you before she looks at anything else, Darren said. They want her to see a difficult, unstable man first and interpret the evidence through that lens. It is a standard approach when the evidence itself is hard to counter. Can they make it work? Gavin asked. They can try, Darren said. He slid the evidence binder across the table. But they cannot change what is in here. And the judge has been doing this for 22 years. The hearing that mattered happened on a Tuesday morning in early March. The courtroom was small and functional. Pale walls, fluorescent lighting, dark wood benches worn smooth by years of use. It smelled faintly of old paper and floor wax. Gavin had expected to feel something larger walking in, some heightened sense of significance. What he felt was focus. The same focus he brought to a complex job site, the steady narrowing of attention to what was in front of him. He sat beside Darren at the plaintiff's table. His hands were flat on the surface in front of him. He kept his breathing even. Brinley sat at the opposing table with Patricia Holt. She had dressed carefully for this. Neutral colors, composed expression, the look of someone who had been coached and had taken the coaching seriously. She did not look at Gavin when she came in. Dolores was not present. She had her own legal situation to manage by this point, and her attorney had apparently advised against her appearance. The morning began with procedural matters and opening arguments. Patricia Holt was efficient and confident. She framed the case early. A loving mother who had made a judgment error in allowing a family member access to the child. A father whose reaction had been disproportionate and whose behavior throughout the marriage had been characterized by controlling tendencies. She was good at her job. Gavin watched her and listened and said nothing. Then Ms. Renee Calder was called to testify. She was exactly the same person in the witness chair as she had been in that small conference room at the daycare, steady, careful, completely precise. She described the incident logs in detail. She walked through each entry, the dates, the observations, the bruising she had photographed. She described the behavioral changes she had documented over 6 months. She described the conversation she had attempted to have with Brinley and Brinley's response. Patricia Holt cross-examined her thoroughly. She challenged the documentation process, questioned whether a daycare employee was qualified to interpret bruising as evidence of abuse rather than ordinary childhood injury, pushed on the timeline and the record-keeping standards. Ms. Calder answered each question in the same steady, unhurried way. She did not become flustered. She did not overstate. She said exactly what she had observed, and she said it with the precision of someone who had been observing children professionally for 18 years. Then Darren entered the security footage into evidence. The courtroom was quiet in a particular way, while the judge watched all 3 clips. Not just the absence of noise, but the specific quality of attention that fills a room when something important is being seen and everyone present knows it. Gavin watched the judge. She was in her late 50s, with reading glasses on a lanyard and an expression that had been professionally neutral for the entire morning. She watched the first clip without changing. She watched the second. When the third clip ran, the shaking, and then the figure of Brinley standing at the wall, something shifted in the judge's face. Not drama, a small tightening around the eyes, a nearly imperceptible stillness. The clip ended. The judge let a moment go by. "Counsel," she said, addressing Patricia Holt, "I would like to hear your client's response to what is depicted in Exhibit 3. There was a brief consultation at the opposing table. Then Brinley turned and said something to her attorney. Holt turned back to the judge. "My client's position is that the footage is being interpreted without the full context of the situation, Your Honor." The judge looked at the screen. Then she looked at Holt. "The footage shows a child being shaken. What context would be appropriate to that?" Holt paused. It was a brief pause, but in a courtroom, brief pauses mean something. Then Brinley did something that appeared to surprise even her own attorney. She spoke directly without being asked. "My mother was frustrated," Brinley said, her voice controlled but tighter than she probably intended. Lila was being uncooperative. It was one moment. It is being taken out of context. The judge looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at Gavin briefly. Then she wrote something on the pad in front of her. That was when Gavin knew. He did not let it show. He sat exactly as he had been sitting all morning, but inside something that had been braced very hard for a very long time loosened slightly. Not victory. It was not victory yet. But the truth had been in the room all morning, and the judge had seen it. The final piece arrived 2 days after the hearing. Darren called him on a Thursday morning while Gavin was on a job site, reviewing plans with his crew foreman. He stepped away from the noise and put the phone to his ear. A neighbor came forward, Darren said. A man named Todd Ellerby. He lives directly across from the Kincaid house. He says he witnessed something in early November and he recorded it on his phone. Gavin was quiet for a moment. Around him, the sounds of the job site continued. The mechanical sounds of work being done, ordinary and indifferent. What did he record? He asked. Dolores striking Lila in the driveway. Open hand, face. Middle of the afternoon. Clear angle, good light. Gavin set down the roll plans he had been holding. He set them down carefully. He kept it, he said. He kept it because he did not know what to do with it. He told me he felt like it was not his place to interfere in a family matter. When a legal case became known in the neighborhood, he decided he could not stay quiet anymore. He has been losing sleep over it. He came forward, Gavin said. That is what matters. The video was submitted to the court within 48 hours. Darren also forwarded it to the Spokane Police Department and to Child Protective Services, which had already opened a preliminary inquiry based on the evidence presented at the hearing. The response from CPS was not slow. An investigator was assigned the same day. They conducted interviews and reviewed the existing record over the following 10 days. Their findings were unambiguous. A documented pattern of physical abuse of a minor by Dolores Kincaid, corroborated across multiple independent sources: daycare logs, daycare security footage, neighbor testimony and video, and the psychological evaluation for Dr. Okonkwo. The pattern was consistent. The evidence was not circumstantial. Criminal charges were filed. Dolores Kincaid was taken in on a Wednesday afternoon and charged with child abuse in the second degree. Gavin learned about the arrest from Darren. He was in his apartment at the time, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold. He listened to Darren's summary without interrupting. He did not feel satisfied. Satisfaction was not the right word for it. He felt something closer to a grim, exhausted relief. The feeling of a thing finally being named correctly, finally being treated as what it was instead of what everyone had been content to call it. There was no pleasure in it. There never could be. His daughter had been hurt. An arrest did not undo that. Nothing would, but it was something. Brinley called him that evening. He watched her name on a screen and did not answer. She called again. He did not answer. She left a voicemail. He listened to it once. Her voice in it was different from any version of her voice he had heard in 6 years of marriage. Not the controlled anger he knew, not the cold certainty, not the strategic calm of the courtroom. Something had come loose in it. She sounded like a person who had believed very hard in a version of events and had just watched that version fall completely apart. This is not supposed to happen, she said. None of this was supposed to happen like this. Gavin, call me, please. He stood in his kitchen and listened to the message all the way to the end. Then he deleted it. She was right that it was not supposed to happen. None of it was supposed to happen. Lila was not supposed to have been hurt. Brinley was not supposed to have stood in that parking lot and watched it. The bruises were not supposed to have been there. The incident logs were not supposed to exist. None of it was supposed to happen. But it had. It had been happening for a long time. And now there were consequences. The final custody hearing was held on a Thursday morning in the third week of March. The sky outside was beginning to soften for the first time since December. The gray had thinned, and there was the faint suggestion of light behind it. Gavin drove to the courthouse alone, parked, and sat in his car for 5 minutes before he went inside. He thought about Lila. He thought about her at daycare right now, with Ms. Calder, probably at the long table doing a craft project, probably talking. She talked more now than she had 6 weeks ago. She had opinions about things. She had started correcting him when he used the wrong name for her stuffed animals. He had been getting them wrong on purpose to hear her correct him. He got out of the car and went inside. The judge had reviewed everything. The daycare documentation, the security footage, the psychological evaluation from Dr. Okonkwo, the neighbor's video, the CPS findings, the criminal charges. She had also reviewed Brinley's filings, the declarations from her witnesses, and the full transcript of Brinley's deposition. She had read all of it. Patricia Holt made her closing argument for joint custody. She was thorough and calm. She acknowledged that Dolores Kincaid's behavior had been inappropriate, a word she chose carefully, and stated that this should not be held against Brinley, who was a loving and present mother with stable employment and a genuine bond with her daughter. She argued that Lila deserved access to both parents, that restricting Brinley's involvement would cause its own harm. The judge let her finish. She did not interrupt. Then she turned to her notes, and she spoke. She said the court's obligation was to the best interest of the minor child, above all other considerations. She said the evidence before her demonstrated a documented, sustained pattern of physical abuse toward Lila Hayes by Dolores Kincaid, spanning a minimum of 6 months and supported by independent corroboration from multiple unrelated sources. She said the evidence further demonstrated that Brinley Hayes had been made aware of this pattern, had dismissed a formal concern raised by trained child care professionals, and had been physically present during at least one documented incident, and had taken no protective action. She paused there. She looked at her notes. Then she said that a parent's most fundamental obligation to a child was protection. Not provision, not affection, not presence alone. Protection. That obligation did not require the parent to be the one causing harm. It required the parent to see harm being done to their child and to stop it. That standard was simple. It had not been met. She ruled full physical and legal custody to Gavin Hayes, effective immediately. Supervised visitation for Brinley Hayes, 2 sessions per month at a court-approved neutral facility, with a certified supervisor present for the duration of each visit, pending formal review after 6 months. No unsupervised contact between Lila Hayes and Dolores Kincaid until further court order. Divorce to be finalized under terms consistent with the custody arrangement. The judge set down her pen. The room was very quiet. At the opposing table, Brinley sat completely still. Patricia Holt was writing something. Brinley was not looking at anything that Gavin could identify. Not the judge, not the table, not the window. Her face had gone somewhere he did not recognize. The composed, in-control surface she had worn all morning had come apart. Not in a dramatic way. It had simply gone. What was underneath, it was something quieter and harder to look at. Gavin turned away. He looked at Darren, who gave him a single, quiet nod. It was over. 6 months later, Gavin rented a small house near a lake about 20 minutes outside of Spokane. It was not a remarkable house by any measure. 2 bedrooms, a narrow kitchen with older appliances, a yard that needed attention. The previous tenant had left a weathered garden hose coiled near the back step and a rusted bird feeder hanging from the oak tree in the corner of the yard. Gavin left both where they were. He liked the feeling of a place that had been lived in. The lake was close enough that in the evenings, with a window above the kitchen sink open, you could hear it. Not loudly, a gentle, irregular sound, water moving against rocks somewhere out of sight. Lila liked to fall asleep with the window open for that reason. She had told him it sounded like the lake was breathing. He had painted her room a soft green. She had asked for a color that looked like the outside. He had brought home 4 paint sample strips from the hardware store and held them against the wall while she considered each one with great seriousness. She chose the second from the left. He painted it on a Saturday morning while she helped by painting the lower 6 inches of the wall and a significant section of the floor. She was sleeping through the night now. She had not done that consistently in the last year of their old life. Dr. Okonkwo noted it in her follow-up reports as a meaningful positive indicator, one of several. The hypervigilance was decreasing. The startle response had quieted. Lila was asking more questions and had opinions about more things, and was louder at the dinner table in the easy, unconsidered way children are loud when they feel safe. She had started singing to herself while she played. Small, tuneless songs she made up as she went, with no particular melody and lyrics that changed depending on what she was doing. He would hear her in her room in the afternoons, a soft, wandering sound, completely unself-conscious. He had not heard her do that before. He did not say anything about it. He just listened. Gavin noticed all of these things. He noticed them with the specific attention of a person who has spent time fearing they might not get to notice them at all. One evening in June, he was making dinner. Pasta, the simple kind with butter and Parmesan and a little black pepper. Lila's request, which she made most Thursday evenings. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a box of crayons and a piece of paper, working on something that appeared to be a drawing of the bird feeder in the backyard, though it was also possibly a tree or a streetlight. He was not going to ask. He was at the stove when he heard it, the sound of the cup going over. It spread across the table the same way it had 6 months ago at Dolores's house. The same dark cranberry color, spreading fast across the surface in the same wide, fast stain. Lila froze. It lasted only a second. That old reflex, trained into her by months of learning that a spill was the beginning of something bad. Her body remembered even when her mind was beginning to forget. Her hands came flat against the table, and her eyes went still, and she waited. Gavin turned from the stove. He crossed to the table in 2 steps and crouched beside her, so they were at the same height. "Hey," he said. "Steady. Quiet. No urgency in it. No irritation. Nothing that required a response. It is just a spill." She looked at him. He could see the second she processed it, the second she understood that nothing was coming, that the pause after the spill was not the warning she had been conditioned to expect. Her shoulders dropped. "We clean it and we move on," he said. "That is all." He went to the counter and got the dish towel and started wiping up the juice. After a moment, Lila slid off her chair and put her small hand on the edge of the towel and helped him push it across the table, absorbing the stain. She was not hurrying. She was just helping, not afraid. When the table was clean, she climbed back in her chair, picked up her green crayon, and went back to the drawing. Like it had been nothing. Because it was nothing. Because in this kitchen, at this table, a spill was a thing you cleaned up, and then you went back to what you were doing. Gavin stood at the counter for a moment. The pasta was boiling. The evening light through the window above the sink had turned the surface of the lake, visible just beyond the yard, the color of copper. The lake was breathing. He turned back to the stove. He did not think about Brinley. He did not think about Dolores, who was working through criminal proceedings with her attorney and would be doing so for some time to come. He did not think about the Christmas dinner table or the motel room or the courtroom. Those things had happened. They were part of how he and his daughter had arrived here. But they were not what this kitchen was. He thought about Lila behind him, drawing something in green crayon, humming a song she was making up as she went. He had fought for that. For a kitchen where a spill was just a spill, and a song was just a song, and his daughter could exist in the ordinary, unbothered way that was every child's right. He stirred the pasta and waited for it to finish. Final resolution: Gavin Hayes never forgave Brinley. Not once. Not in any of the forms that forgiveness sometimes takes. Not the grand kind, not the quiet, private kind that people say is for yourself and not for the other person. He did not forgive her, and he did not pretend to, and he did not feel diminished by that. Forgiveness was not the thing he owed her. What she had done was not a mistake. Mistakes happen in a moment, without intention. What Brinley had done was different. It was a sustained series of choices, made over years, in full awareness of what was happening. She had heard a trained educator raise a concern about her daughter, and she had ended the conversation. She had stood in a parking lot and watched and not moved. She had looked at bruises and used the word dramatic. She had listened to her daughter's silence and called it a mood. Each one of those choices had been made deliberately in the direction of her own comfort and her mother's approval at the cost of Lila's safety. That was not something you forgave. That was something you named clearly and moved away from. The consequences were proportional to the choices. Brinley lost her marriage. She lost the daily presence of her daughter. The mornings, the dinners, the ordinary Tuesday evenings that make up most of a child's life. She lost the image she had maintained with such effort. The capable, in-control woman who handled things, who had a good family, who made good decisions. That image had been her primary investment, and it had paid nothing in the end because it had been built on a refusal to see what was real. She had 2 supervised visits a month now. A court-approved supervisor sat in the room and watched. Those were the terms. She had chosen everything that had led to those terms. As for Dolores Kincaid, the dining room table she had presided over had been replaced by a courtroom, and the people in that courtroom did not owe her their silence. The certainty she had always carried, the assurance that she knew how things should be done and that no one had the standing to tell her otherwise, none of that had any weight in a courtroom. The judge was not interested in her version of normal. The law was not interested in her explanations. The evidence was what it was. And this time, no one stayed silent. Gavin had not been looking for a fight. He had spent years trying to hold things together, trying to believe that patience was the right tool, that the people around him would make better choices if he gave them enough room and enough time. He had been wrong about that, but he did not blame himself for the time it had taken. He had believed what he wanted to believe because the alternative was something too large and too hard to face all at once. When a moment came, when there was no version of Christmas night that could be explained away or reframed or set aside, he had not hesitated. He had picked up his daughter and walked out. He had called a lawyer. He had gathered everything available, every document, every timestamp, every piece of footage, every person who had witnessed something and been afraid to speak. He had built from all of it not a case for revenge, but something far more important. Protection. Durable, legal, documented protection. His daughter was 5 years old now. She painted her bedroom floor by accident and corrected him about the names of stuffed animals and sang made-up songs and slept through the night and helped clean up spills and asked him why the lake looked orange at sunset and why the pasta had to boil before you could eat it and what kind of bird was that one. The one on the feeder? No, not that one, the other one. She was growing. She was curious. She was not afraid. He had not raised his daughter to be afraid. And in the end, despite everything that had been done to make her that way, she wasn't.